Back in 2015, the company that I worked for expanded to a new office in Rochester. I stayed there for about a week to overview their recruiting process and to sign off on a couple of larger purchases. It was all the standard procedure. I'd done this before and at an affiliate branch, but it was my first time doing it on my own. It was a lot of responsibility. I got to a room at a small hotel called the Silver Sands Hotel. I think the place closed in like 2021. I can't see it online anymore. It was just down the road from the Silver Lake, hence the name. It didn't have a lot of visitors, so the rooms were pretty cheap and surprisingly fresh. While my work is interesting in itself, what I'm here to tell you about is something that happened at the hotel. I'm a practical kind of man, so I'm not much for ghost stories or make-believe, but there's also no way for me to really ignore something I experienced with my own eyes and ears. After my first day at the new office, I was exhausted. All I'd had to eat all day was salami and brie cheese from a cheap deli, and my stomach was doing flips. I was having a smoke outside the hotel before settling in for the night, talking to my wife on the phone. I always do this thing when I'm having a long phone conversation where I pace back and forth. I was barely paying attention when I wandered across the small field of tall grass back on the back road. In that field, I spotted something blue. I got a closer look and found a handful of blue sunflowers. I thought they were just dry and dead at first, but it was just the color. I picked one to take home to my wife. Blue is her favorite color. I think she could hear something sneaky in my voice. I remember her commenting on it. I went back to my room. There was a Bible on the nightstand, so I opened it to a random passage and put the sunflower in it. Then I put the lamp on top of it for pressure, a simple press and dry. I didn't think much until the next morning when I woke up and there were a couple of little black bugs crawling across the nightstand. Just a few, maybe like 3 or 4. I crushed them with my thumb, washed my hands, and figured that was that. Then I went to the office. After a long day at work, that little detail completely slipped my mind. I figured they were just something brought in with the flower, and that they'd be either dead or gone before long. My mind was full of Excel, spreadsheets, email, responses, and company policies. I didn't have time to think about little things crawling around in my hotel room. But by the time I got back, I couldn't ignore them anymore. I didn't notice them at first, but the moment that I sat down on my bed and turned on my lamp, they were impossible to ignore. They'd spread from just a couple to a couple of dozen, and they weren't just crawling around on my nightstand, but in my bed. They were crawling all over the Bible and the dry pressed sunflower, so I just threw the thing away. I tried wiping away the bugs, but there were too many, and a couple of them had gotten into my clothes as well. They didn't bite or anything, but I could feel them just tickling me. It was so faint that even after I'd wiped them all off, I could still imagine myself feeling them. It was late, but I was disgusted. I went downstairs to talk to the receptionist about my room having some kind of bed bug, and they took it pretty seriously. They gave me a new room immediately, and they told me that they'd be investigating it for me. But despite a shower and a change of clothes and a completely new room, I could still feel those things tickling my skin. I imagined seeing them, only for it to turn out to be just specks of dust and grains of sand. They were gone, but they didn't feel gone. The next day, as I left for work, the receptionist called me over. I was a bit stressed, and I think that she picked up on that, so she cut straight to the point. Sir, we haven't found any type of bed bugs in your room," she explained. "You should be okay. I'm sorry if you were inconvenienced." "You sure there weren't any bed bugs?" I asked. "Did you check the nightstand?" "Yeah, we checked all over. We take this sort of thing pretty seriously." "Well, I'm sure what I saw," I said. "There were bugs there." "I don't know what to tell you, sir. There's nothing there." That distracted me a bit. I couldn't stop wondering what they'd been and how they could have even gone without a trace. It had just been a day. There ought to be a couple around still, but it didn't stop there. A couple of times that day, I got this sudden shiver, like something crawling across my bones, sending shards of ice through my nerves. I'd be in a meeting with one of the local suppliers and I'd just completely lose my train of thought and in mid-sentence, like I had a mind sneeze or something. It looked strange and I didn't make a very good impression. I checked myself in the bathroom 3 times. At one point, I even took off all my clothes in the bathroom and just stood in the stall and shook them piece by piece to see if maybe anything would fall out. When I got to my socks, a small black dot fell out, but I just couldn't tell. Was it a dead bug or a grain of sand or just a speck of dust? After all that effort, I was left none the wiser, and it gnawed in the back of my mind. Coming back to the hotel, I felt paranoid. I checked my room up and down, but I couldn't find anything. I showered for about an hour, scrubbing myself all over with 2 different kinds of soap. I checked my hair, my beard, my ears, and with every little speck of black that fell out, I felt my heart sink. I couldn't tell what was what anymore, and my senses were screaming at me that everything I felt was these ticklish little things. I could barely sleep. I kept waking up to these weird noises as if something was poking around in my ear. I had these awful nightmares, and it was hard to figure out where the nightmare ended and my bed started. I'd dream I was covered in those things, and when I'd wake up, I'd still feel them on my skin. I'd get up with my heart pounding out of my chest, checking the bed over and over. All in all, I got about 2 hours of sleep. I was a complete mess the next day, but I had to review my final vision of our contract, and it was going to be hell. In the morning when I put my clothes on, I noticed a couple of bugs. This time, there was no doubt. They moved. There was a dozen or so of them, crawling all over my bag. I was already late for work, so I didn't have time to get a new room. I stopped briefly at the reception. I explained that I had found a couple more bugs, and I'd appreciate if they could check it out, and if they found something, that they would just move my items into another room. The receptionist rolled her eyes and kept smiling with her face. She clearly thought that I was having some kind of hypochondriac moment, or that I was just messing with her, but she was a professional. She smiled, agreed, and wished me a good day. I've got to emphasize, I don't have a problem with creepy crawlies. I ate earthworms as a dare when I was a kid. I would catch bumblebees in my bare hands. I never really cared about that stuff, but something about these things really bothered me. It's as if they were just intrusive. They made me doubt they were even real. That day went by as a bit of a blur. I have vague memories of falling asleep in the meeting and having a long discussion about something that I forgot the topic of halfway through. I kept getting these random tics where it felt like a nerve had been pinched. I tried to remind myself that it was most likely just my imagination, but then again, I couldn't tell for sure. By the time that I got back to the hotel, I ran up to the receptionist. The receptionist that I'd previously talked to had finished her shift, but the man who had taken her place had clearly been told about me. He was ready. I didn't even ask him before I got an answer. "Sir, there were no bed bugs in your room," he said. "You're completely fine, and yes, we've checked and double-checked." "I'm sorry," I sighed, stressed. You know, I'm sure I saw something, but... "Sir, I understand, and it's fine. If there really were bed bugs, that'd be something we take very seriously. I don't know what they are, but I saw a bunch of them crawling across the room. Really small things like ground pepper." He raised an eyebrow and gave me a courteous nod. Discussion over. That night I was exhausted. I just lay in bed letting whatever crawl around do it. I didn't care. I could feel them in my hair and on my skin, but they couldn't be real. They'd already checked and there were no insects in there, and yet I found myself looking at a dozen or so of them, crawling around on the floor. As I dozed in and out of an uneasy sleep, I heard a strange scratching sound. like something dragging a brush across a carpet. Looking over at the edge of the bed, the insects on the floor were gone, or had they really even been there to begin with? I kept hearing this strange noise although through the night. I finally fell asleep with my arm hanging over the side of the bed. I could feel a couple of bugs gathering on my fingers. Then, there was something cold, like a wet dog nose. Something touched my finger. I peeked down from my bed a final time as the first rays of the morning sun poked through the hotel curtains, and something pulled back, fast, retreating under the bed. I pulled my arm up and rolled over, hoping it was just my imagination. I couldn't fathom the idea of something hiding under my bed. In the morning, I couldn't tell if I had been dreaming or not. The bugs on the floor were gone. I looked under the bed, and all I could find was a small little vent just big enough for somebody to fit their head in. But it was my final day, and I was checking out. I checked my bag and my clothes a final time, and it looked fine. Nothing creepy nor crawly. I checked out of my room and headed to the receptionist to give him the key. No issues tonight? She asked. Some, I said. Not more than usual. I'm sorry, she huffed. But I don't understand. Did you really see something up there? Sometimes, I admitted. It's like little black things. I can't explain it. We had Jordan up there all day and he couldn't find a single bug. He vacuumed the place too, even 3 times. I don't know what to tell you, I said. It's frustrating. Sir, I don't want to come off as accusatory, but may I offer some advice? Shoot. She gave me a look, a very, very long look. My eyes felt heavier and heavier the more I kept eye contact with her. I was more tired than I first thought I was, it seemed. Maybe it's not the room, sir, she said. Maybe it's you, or something you brought in. I made it through the day without all that much trouble. We had a couple of meetings, rounded off in a few difficult conversations, and double-checked the issues we'd tackled over the week. Despite it all, I was done, and I could go home. Work over. It was already getting dark when I got into my car. If I left immediately, I'd be home by midnight. I could probably have stayed another night, but at that point I just wanted to go home. I needed something familiar to reset. Usually when I feel like this, I've got a few screws loose. My wife is the one that usually tries to keep me grounded, and I really, really miss her. It was all such a relief. I was associating the hotel with that itchy feeling, or having something crawling on my skin and getting as far away from it as possible really would help. It wouldn't matter if it was real or not, if I was far, far away. So, I drove off, adding some distance between me and that town of Rochester. But another 30 minutes or so down the road, I felt it. That itch, that tickle. I stopped at the rest stop area, turned off my car, and closed my eyes. I took a few deep breaths. I tried to convince myself that I wasn't really feeling it. It couldn't be there. It wasn't. It was really dark outside. I could hear cars and trucks passing by from the nearby road. There was no one else around, or at least, so I thought. Looking back at it, there had been signs. The scratching noises at night, the air vents under my bed, and why was I the only one to see those bugs? It's as if they appeared and disappeared, seemingly at random. I opened my eyes, hoping something had changed, and though I didn't know it, it had. I just hadn't seen it. I turned my car keys, but nothing happened. I tried again. Not a sound. Nothing. I got out to check the engine, but I couldn't make sense of it. I'm not much of a car guy, but I could tell a couple of cables had either been cut or pulled out. It wasn't a clean cut, though. It looked like they had been gnawed on. Getting back in my car, I pulled out my phone to call for assistance when I noticed something. Little black spots on my hand. They were really there. I could feel them. Then, a click. My glove box slowly opened by itself. Something pure white, glistening wet, emerged like an elongated slug. I couldn't move. It's as if I couldn't fully comprehend it. There was barely any light, just vague reflections coming through the passing cars in a rhythmic pulse-like manner, like a slow strobe light. And with every new pulse of light, the thing was a little closer. I couldn't tell if it was trying to sneak up on me or if it was really naturally slow. It touched my arm. It was a familiar sensation. This is what I'd felt that night when I let my arm hang off at the side of the bed. It twitched a little and gave my arm a big lick. The thing burned like acid, and it had suddenly hit me that this was, in fact, real. My heart shot out of my chest as I stumbled my way out of the car, falling backwards out of the driver's seat. I kicked the door closed just as that white thing, writhing mess, threw itself at the window. It looked gelatinous. It pressed itself against the corner of the window and slowly forced its way through. Only then did I realize I'd left my phone in the car. I must have dropped it in the moment when that thing touched me. I crawled backwards to get some distance, but by the time I'd gotten up to run, that thing had made its way out of the car. It was surprisingly big, tall enough to reach my midriff if it were to stretch. I can't properly explain what this thing really looked like. It was more of like an octopus than a slug, but it had the texture of a soft chitin. It had a body-like mass, which resembled a cluster of lotus pods. A few pods produced these long appendages, which seemed to stretch several times its height. It's so hard to say what was up or down or the head or anything. I couldn't see any eyes or ears, but it seemed to know exactly where I was. So when I turned to run, it was right behind me. It was faster than I had anticipated. It threw out its arms and pulled itself forward, quickly gaining momentum until it could wrap itself around my leg. It did so with force of a foxtrot. I made it to the tree line before it got me. There was a nearby picnic table, and I had managed to grab the foot of it. I tried to pull myself forward, but that thing, it was heavy. It was like trying to drag a plastic bag full of marmalade. I fought it tooth and goddamn nail. I punched, kicked, slapped, and pulled at it, but it just kept climbing. Those appendages wrapped around my arms, burning me with like acetone. It got to my neck, and I could hear something coming from it, like an inflating and deflating balloon, combined with the purr of a cat. Then, it retracted a membrane, revealing a stinger. It stuck me in the shoulder. I was full on panicking at this point, screaming for help at the top of my lungs, but I just couldn't make a lot of noise. This thing was heavy, and I was barely breathing. I was taking breaths that were so shallow that I could feel my vision getting blurry. It wrapped something around my arm and pressed. It pressed so hard that I thought something would snap. The more I pulled, the harder it grabbed, locking me to the ground. But it wasn't killing me. It wasn't drinking my blood. I looked closer. There were little black bugs pouring out of the sting in my shoulder. This blob thing was licking them up. These things had literally been inside me, and it was eating them. It explained so much. The bugs had been using me to sort of a carrier, and the moment I left the room, they disappeared. That's why I was the only one seeing them. They followed me, and this thing had been following me in turn, trying to catch a stray meal. This thing was like an anteater, and I was the anthill. I tried to stay still. It dragged its appendages across my hair, effectively cleaning me like a wounded kitten, and this thing was the mother cat. I got 3 more stings, one in my shoulder blade, one on the left tricep, and one in my right calf, and with every wound, it pressed those things out of me. Then it was done. It rolled off and dragged itself into the woods. After a minute or so, I couldn't hear it anymore. I got up, and my whole body felt numb. That this thing must have had some kind of anesthetic effect, because I couldn't feel my skin around the puncture wounds. I had these dark blue fist-sized bruises over my body where that thing had squeezed me. But at that moment, I was just happy to be alive. Getting back to my car, I realized something. That thing must have been more intelligent than I gave it credit for. It had understood that stopping my car would give it time and space that it needed to attack. It also knew how to stop my car. It had taken several careful steps not to be caught or seen before it revealed itself. And that first contact, it had slowly reached out to me as if it was seeing if I was hostile. I picked up my phone and called for a tow. After all that, it seemed like I was staying in Minnesota for another night. Now that I look back on it years later, I still don't know what to make of it. I think I got in touch with something I shouldn't, that this thing was cleaning up the mess. Something hid inside of that damn flower, and this blob was feeding on it. I've never heard or seen anything like it before or since, but I can't deny that it happened. It was tough to explain to my wife. I finally went with, I messed with a wasp nest. It was easier of trying to explain what I had experienced over those days. It sounded insane just even talking about it in my own head. I believe there are ecosystems that live right under our noses. I think there's more to it than we really can anticipate. And some of these things come from places we can only imagine or begin to even understand. If these kind of things can exist up here on the surface with us, what else is out there in the places where we can't look? It makes me think of all those dark and unchecked corners of that room. The world, really. If you lift the wrong rock at the wrong time, what might spring out? Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna apologize about my voice going in and out like it is. It's I've been sick for the past couple weeks, and I didn't want to say anything, but it sucks. It sucks very much. And of course, with me, what it is, it really sucks even more because it's always gonna affect my voice every single time, like depth-wise as well. So it's gonna be interesting. But yeah, if you like this and you would like to hear more like this, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. If this is your first story of mine that you've heard, I apologize. Make sure to go check out something else because I'm very sick and my voice is going in and out, and it's probably not going to sound the best. But this was a really good story, and I would really like to do more of these. But make sure to check out the links in the description as well, like Twitter, Instagram, everything like that, including my Gmail if you want to submit a story. I've got a lot of content and a lot more coming, so just know that. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one.